There's a version of you that doesn't exist yet. And the strange part is that nothing about your income, your job title, or your zip code determines whether that version ever gets built. What determines it is smaller than that, almost embarrassingly small. It's the decision you make in the next 30 seconds after money touches your hands. You don't start with nothing the way people imagine it. Nothing isn't a bank account at zero. Nothing is a series of habits that were never designed on purpose. You spend the way you were taught to spend, which is to say you spend the way it felt natural to spend, which is to say you spend the way everyone around you spent without ever once asking whether that pattern was built for your survival or for someone else's profit. Picture the paycheck, not a specific number, just the shape of it landing. Some of it disappears before you even see it, swallowed by rent, by a phone bill, by the quiet tax of simply existing in a body that needs shelter and food. What's left feels like yours. It feels earned, which it is, and it feels spendable, which is where the story usually goes wrong. Here is the part nobody explains clearly enough. Wealth is not built from the money you make. It's built from the gap between what you make and what you keep. Two people can earn the exact same amount for 20 years and end up in entirely different lives, not because one of them was smarter or luckier, but because one of them protected a gap, and the other let the gap close every single month without noticing it closing. You might be earning $900 a week. You might be earning $4,000. The number changes the timeline, not the mechanism. The mechanism is always the same, and it's almost insulting in its simplicity. Money that stays invested grows on its own, without your effort, without your attention, without your permission even being required after the first decision is made. Consider $40, not a large number, small enough that losing it wouldn't change your week. Now imagine that $40 set aside every single week, not spent, not swept into a subscription or a delivery fee, but placed somewhere it can grow at a historically reasonable rate for the stock market over long periods. In 30 years, that quiet, almost forgettable $40 a week becomes something in the range of $200,000. Nobody got a raise in that story. Nobody found a shortcut. The only ingredient was time being allowed to do what time does. This is where most people stop listening, because it sounds like a lecture about discipline. And discipline is a word that makes people feel accused. But this isn't about discipline. It's about noticing. You already have a system running in your life right now, today. Whether or not you built it on purpose, every dollar you touch is already being routed somewhere. The only question is whether that routing was designed by you or inherited from a version of you that never sat down to think about it. Starting from nothing means the first move isn't a big one. It's not a business plan. It's not a crypto trade. It's opening an account you can't easily touch and moving one small, boring, repeatable amount into it before your week has a chance to spend it for you. The amount matters less than the repetition. A pattern repeated for 30 years will always outperform a burst of motivation that lasts 3 weeks and disappears. There's a version of this story where you wait. You wait for the promotion, the better job, the year when things finally feel stable enough to start. And that waiting feels responsible. It feels like patience, but patience and postponement wear the same clothes, and only one of them is actually working in your favor. The market doesn't care that you were waiting for a better moment. It compounds, regardless of whether you participated. And every year you wait is a year of growth that simply never happens for you, quietly, without ever announcing what it cost. Here's the part that reframes everything. You don't need a high income to build wealth. You need a system that doesn't depend on your motivation to survive, because motivation is unreliable. It's high after a documentary, high after a bad week at work, high after watching someone else's success story, and then it fades, the way motivation always fades. And what's left is whatever structure you built while the motivation was still around. So the people who build wealth from nothing usually aren't the people who had a dramatic turning point. They're the people who made one boring decision and then let it run on autopilot long enough that they eventually forgot it was even a decision. They automated the $40. They stopped checking it daily. They let the account become invisible. And invisibility, strangely, became its greatest strength. Because money you don't see is money you're never tempted to spend. There will be a year, maybe several years, where the account looks unimpressive. A few $1,000s sitting quietly, while your friends buy cars and take trips and post photos that make your patience look foolish by comparison. This is the part where most people quit, right before the curve does the thing curves eventually do, which is bend upward faster than anyone expects, not because of a single dramatic event, but because growth compounding on growth eventually stops looking linear and starts looking like something else entirely. By the time that happens, you won't remember the exact week you started. You won't remember the specific $40. What you'll remember is that at some point, money stopped being something you chased and started being something that worked for you while you were doing something else entirely. Sleeping, working, living a life that had nothing to do with checking a portfolio. That's the actual definition of wealth from nothing. Not a windfall, not a lucky break, just a gap, protected consistently, for long enough that time was allowed to finish the job you started. The account you open this week won't feel like much. It isn't supposed to. It's supposed to be small enough that you barely notice its absence, and quiet enough that it can keep growing long after you've stopped thinking about the day you built it.